Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Nicole Kitchen and I'm an academic trainer with the Center for Teaching and Learning. We're here today for a fantastic webinar with Dr. Barbara Hall from the School of Education, as well as numerous amazing faculty members as well with the School of Education. I am going to just give you a few little housekeeping items. There is a Q&A at the bottom of your screen that you can ask questions to Dr. Hall or any of the other faculty members for today's panel, as well as a chat screen. As you go on, we can go ahead and unmute you if you want to talk live. If not, you can go ahead and answer or ask your questions through the chat screen. There are no slides, so it is an open panel today for your session. So as we jump ahead, I'm going to throw it off to Dr. Barbara Hall, and we're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar.
Thanks so much, Nicole, and thanks to each of you for joining us today. I think we have a good mix of students, alumni, staff, and faculty on our group, so it's going to be, I think, an interesting discussion, and I really appreciate you participating. While I share a little bit about how our discussion is going to work, I want to invite you to share what your role is here at NCU in the chat box. So you may notice, as Nicole mentioned, there's a chat box where you can just have, general chat. And then there's the Q&A box. So in the chat box, just share what's your role at NCU? Where are you calling in from? I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, so here on the East Coast as well. And I'm the Director of Curriculum for the School of Education and an Associate Professor. I teach in the ID programs that we have. So let's see, let me pull up the chat real quick. This is going to be an informal, casual affair, as you will learn. Hello, Lori and Becky. Thank you for joining us in particular. I'll shout out to the folks I know. Let's see who else we have. We have Vanessa, who's a doctoral student at NCU, David, Sherry. Great. So it looks like we are spanning the globe, so to speak. So thank you all. Please continue to introduce yourselves. I also invite you to continue the conversation in the chat. I'm not distracted by it, so you guys can talk about whatever you want there. Help build some community, maybe make some connections. This is going to be an open discussion and not a presentation, as Nicole mentioned. There are no slides. The session is going to be recorded, and we are going to share the recording in the Commons. Let's see. Oh, of course, we are here to talk about what you want to talk about. So some of you submitted questions ahead of time, and I've captured those, but you're also welcome to continue to submit questions by using the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to those. Any questions that we don't get to, we will try to answer in the ID Community of Practice, or the ID COP. If you're not a member there already, it is an open forum. You don't have to be an instructional designer or affiliated with an ID program to join, so you're welcome to hop on in there. A couple other housekeeping notes. If you submitted a question in advance, I might rephrase your question a little bit, combine it with another question, or make it a broader question, so hopefully it will apply to the whole audience. So you might recognize your question, but it might not sound exactly the same. All right then. So I will ask the first questions to our panelists. I do have notes in case you couldn't tell. So we'll start with some introductions. As I mentioned, I am Barbara Hall, the Director of Curriculum in the School of Education. I'm also the steward in the Instructional Design Community of Practice. I earned my own doctorate degree, my PhD in Instructional Design in 2011. And as I mentioned, I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And so I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and answer the question, when people ask you, who aren't in the field, what is instructional design? What's your elevator pitch? What's your short answer? And so I saw Dr. Summerville smile. So you know when you make eye contact with the teacher, you're always going to get called on. So Dr. Summerville, please tell us who you are, what your doctoral degree is in, what your role is at NCU, where you live, and what is instructional design?
So my name is Dr. Jennifer Summerville. I am associate faculty full-time here at NCU. as a part of the instructional design program, and I also work with doctoral students, and I teach educational research as well. Let's see, where do I live? I live outside of Fort Worth in a little town called Granbury, which seems to be the Kevin Bacon of Texas. Let's see, what else did you ask me? Oh, where did I get my degree is in educational technology with emphases in instructional design, distance learning, and multimedia design. Notice design, not development. That is for someone else to do. Somebody much better than I am. And I'm not telling you when I got that degree. It was a long time ago. So when people ask me about instructional design and what it is, because half the time they don't know. When they say industrial design, what is that? So what I tell people is, you know, your IKEA instructions that you can't figure out? Okay, so instructional designers can figure out a better way to put those together so that you can figure out exactly how to put something together or how to learn something. But that's what an instructional designer does. And what you usually see, like at NCU, is instructional designers help us design courses. So that is my little elevator speech about instructional design.
I love the reference to IKEA. Thank you. So let's go to Dr. Armstrong. Dr. Armstrong, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Dr. Ann Armstrong, and I am a lifelong learner. So hopefully all of you are like me. I earned a doctoral degree at Columbia University, where I also earned my EDM. In addition to that, I have a master's degree in economics, and I have a master's degree in instructional design. And in 2012, I decided I had never earned an online degree, fully online. I'd taken courses that I needed to do that too. So now I have an MBA in project management. And many of you are going to find that you actually do a lot of project management as you become IDers. It's kind of like something you have to be good at in this day and age. Where do I live? Well, I live normally in Sarasota, but my husband and I are gypsies this summer. So we have been kind of up north. So we've gone from Connecticut to Nantucket, back to Connecticut. We're headed this weekend to Vermont. So we're not sure when we're going to get back to Florida. It's pretty warm down there, so we may wait till closer to mid-October. And what do I think about instructional design? Well, I think the field is evolving, and it's evolved a lot since I've started in it. And it's no longer just about designing and developing instruction. Most of us at this point really need to be mini project managers, and we also need to be able to understand business problems in such a way that we know which ones are instructional and which ones are not. And believe it or not, many of us are going to be asked to solve the non-instructional ones. So our domain gets bigger and bigger as time passes. And so both of us can learn together all of those good things as we go forward.
It's a great point about our broad field. Thank you. Let's go to Dr. Porter. Oh, you're on mute, Dr. Porter.
Okay, there it is. Now can you hear me? Great. Yep. I'm Dr. Paula Porter. I live in Fort Myers, Florida, about an hour south of Dr. Armstrong. And I don't mind the Florida heat because I grew up in Iowa and the heat is just as bad up there as it is down here. So I have been involved in instructional design since, well, if you count my time in education, off and on since about the 80s. But it wasn't really instructional design back then. There was no such thing. In the 90s, I got involved with the internet and worked for several different internet businesses when Al Gore invented it. So I was able to work in the publishing field as well as for one of the search engines before Google, Lycos. So I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something in instruction, education, and with the online world because I loved doing things online. So I've been doing all that for quite a while. So let's see, the question, instructional design. It's a little bit, like Dr. Armstrong said, project management. It's a little bit, it's a lot of writing. And I do have a degree in English, so I'm pretty good at that. It's also a lot of breaking things down to a process and showing people how to do something. And as my father said, I'm great for telling people how to do something. So I guess this field was pretty much designed for me, because we have to be able to determine how to explain sometimes complicated issues in a simplified form and try to get people to follow through with it.
Yes, I love that. I have to tell my dad that too about telling people what to do. So last but not least, Dr. Reid, please tell us about yourself.
Yeah, happy to be here. I see one of my students. Hi, Amber. Nice to see you virtually. My name is Dr. Alan Reid. I am adjunct faculty at NCU. I've been here for a year now. I've designed several of the ID courses in the program as well. I am an English professor for another institution, and then I'm also a design evaluation analyst for yet another institution up north. So I've kind of got my hands everywhere here. But my degree, my doctoral degree, is in instructional design that I received in 2013. And since then, I've been teaching a lot of instructional design courses. And I'm going to have to kind of cherry pick on what several other people have already mentioned about instructional design and what it is and what it means. And I'm definitely going to emphasize the project management aspect of this. I think that was something that was overlooked, at least when I was a student and I was learning about this field. That didn't come up nearly as much as I wish it would have. You might also need to be an expert in communication. And also, I think people mistake you for a technology expert. So I think when I'm telling people what instructional design is and what I do, I talk about the deliberate and systematic process of designing instruction through learning theory, cognitive theory, and instructional strategies. But I also let people know that it's not simply just prescribing a piece of technology to some type of problem. And as someone already alluded to, it may or may not even be an instructional problem that can be diagnosed with instructional design. So that's, I think, where I'll leave it there. And I'm looking forward to talking to everyone here.
Well, I'm glad you're looking forward to it. Since you got the last introduction, I'm going to ask the first question because it's something you sort of touched on, and that is, how is instructional design different from similar fields? So sort of what you mentioned in terms of project management and technology, how would you differentiate ID from some of those other fields?
So instructional design, and I think all of us here will reiterate that it is separate from educational technology. And if you work within the K-12 realm, often those two are confused with one another. People think that a designer is, someone who can help you retrieve your password or fix or update your computer or, help you with some type of program. And oftentimes we probably can help you with that, but that's not really the intention of what we're doing. We have a much broader focus on what we are doing in at least K-12 or academia, which is we're looking specifically at instruction and the strategies that work best with instruction. And then we couple that with cognitive and learning theories that we know work. And we try and apply that approach to an instructional problem. And like I said, unfortunately, sometimes that gets mistaken as simply just being, an instructional or educational technologist whose focus is more on the hardware and software side of the things in academia, at least. And I suppose that's probably true to some extent in corporate as well.
Yes, corporate. That made me think of some of your experiences, Dr. Summerville. So I'm wondering, how would you differentiate instructional design from the more sort of HR, human performance improvement, learning and development specializations?
So when you posed this question, I thought, the thing is that my degree is in educational technology, but trust me when I say I'm not going to fix your printer and I probably don't know how. And I've never really known how, the technology and really techie aspect has never been my thing. But what I can say is that instructional design is a combination of a lot of different things. no matter where you go. I mean, I think that just about anybody who is an instructional designer can say that they do other things. They do project management, they do instructional design, they do some technology, making decision making. They do a lot of different things. We've always done that because it's a part of the design process. So you have to know and understand how to make decisions on what technology would be best for this application, to kind of know and understand when you get an instructional problem like I did in corporate, when it has nothing to do with instruction. You can do instruction all day long, and really you have bad hiring practices. So you have to know and understand some of these things that do come from other fields in order to be an instructional designer. It is a combination of a lot of different fields and a lot of different theories, including cognitive and psychology. And you can have conversations with people from all over the place, and it'll still hit on the field of instructional design in some way. Corporate is one of those things where I really think that they're behind a little bit, and you really have to educate them on what instructional design is, well, maybe a little bit more so than even K-12 now. And I think that having that elevator speech ready to go is going to be like your best friend if you choose to go the corporate route.
Thank you. Dr. Porter, in your introduction, you mentioned when instructional design was a thing. And so we actually have a question that asks exactly that. How long has instructional design been a thing?
I can't really say for sure. I think it kind of came a little bit from curriculum design, and because I did that in the 80s a little bit, but it started more or less, I found it and discovered it and thought I found gold about 2005. And I think that's when the field really started to go, when a lot of the colleges and universities started to add instructional design programs at the bachelor's, master's, and doctorate level programs. Because I found mine in 2004. And prior to that time, I think we were all just kind of muddling, and just like kind of we did in the web world, we didn't have programs like we do today. We didn't have learning management systems like we do today. And it's kind of important to understand too that there's new technology every day that we can tie into instructional design that we didn't have in 2004. I always said I was hired at Reid Elsevier, which was where I worked with the internet industry. I was hired because I could spell HTML. And having come through those periods, we have to kind of think about those things. It's all, I would say it's less than 20 years old in my experience.
Well, I know, Dr. Armstrong, in one of the courses that you helped write for our ID programs, you go a little bit into the history of ID, and we can toss it back even earlier. Would you like to add to that? You are on mute, Dr. Armstrong.
You're right. I'm on double mute.
Yes, I double mute myself too.
So I always laugh at myself because I do a lot of facilitation for Dale Carnegie, and it always catches you when you're double muted. Our field just evolved from so many other fields, from systems theory, from communications theory, from media theory, that, if you really look at the roots, you could go back almost 100 years really to the foundational things that are part of it. I find one of the best books for all of that is Ritchie and Klein and Tracy's book, The Instructional Design Knowledge Base. Unfortunately, it's 2011 and they haven't updated it. I keep waiting for the updated version, but I still think that the content of it, particularly the background of ID, is very strong and definitely something that everybody who is going to become an IDer needs to work at. Just a note on the business side, because I spent a lot of my career at IBM Global Services and at a division of Ernst & Young called Intellinex. And I did find in both of those organizations that there was a lot of respect for the instructional design field and for instructional designers. And just to give you an idea of a project that I was involved in, when IBM bought Lotus Notes, they implemented it themselves, and at General Motors, there were 200,000 people at both implemented. And then they wanted to do it at Prudential for 60,000 seats. And nobody knew how to do it. Only IBM had done it and GM. And I was hired, believe it or not, and this is the kind of thing that's kind of scary. I was hired into the Lotus Notes practice and sent to 2 weeks training on Lotus Notes, and then sent to be the subject matter expert for the IBM team at Prudential on Lotus Notes implementations for 60,000 seats. So here I am, an IDer and a senior consultant at IBM, and have no knowledge. So what did I do? I said, okay, there are 2 large installations that have gone in. I'm going to go talk to every IBMer that was on that team and find out what worked and what didn't work, and then bring that knowledge back to Prudential as we roll out these seats. So always find somebody who knows more than you do, reach out and ask them how they did it. What worked, what didn't work, what do you need to know? And so for those of you who are experienced in the field, you've already got a network of people. You now have all of us at NCU to help you. And for those of you who are novices, we're here to help you share those experiences. Just reach out to us when you want us.
I love that. And thank you for that anecdote as well. I think that lends nicely into a question somebody asked in advance, and then one that we've actually had submitted. So the question in advance was, how can you enter the field of ID without prior experience? And then a sort of a related question that we received is, what educational and professional backgrounds help someone to be successful in the field of ID? So sort of 2 sides of a coin. So I think that I will flip that back to Dr. Summerville, if you want. What background makes someone successful, and how do you break into the field if you don't have any background?
So I think that breaking into the field really depends on what area, because if you're K-12 or if you're higher ed or if you're corporate, your background needs to be in one of those areas if you want to break into it and you don't have a whole lot of experience. But what I can tell you is that there are certain skill sets that you really need to have in order to get most jobs today. And there are certain elements of software and LMS systems in particular that you should familiarize yourself with. Corporate is a little bit different, but I don't think if you had like Blackboard or Canvas experience, they would turn you away. A lot of their learning management systems are very proprietary. But if you don't have any experience designing in one of the big learning management systems, see if you can get a free account on Blackboard or Canvas. I mean, Canvas has a whole host of information that's free and available for you to look at, or Desire to Learn, or, there are several that are, that you can utilize. That's really critical in understanding a learning management system, because regardless of what, field you go into, you probably are going to use a learning management system. The second thing, if I say, okay, you need to learn this, currently it's Articulate. So Articulate is a big, huge suite of software that will allow you to create basically software. It is something that will allow you to involve a whole lot of interactivity, and it is much easier to do today than it was just a few years ago. Also, get a screen capture software. I personally use Screencast-O-Matic because it's free to use, or even if you get the biggie, it's like $25 a year. And that will allow you to do this really important thing called closed captioning. And that is something that everyone needs to know how to do to avoid a big fat lawsuit. So breaking into that background is being able to do that. And then if you can get a part-time job and show people your skill set, have a branded website for yourself, those will really give you a leg up.
I think your background in educational technology certainly shined through in your response. I like that. That's one of the things I like about working with my colleagues is we all have we're all like different flavors of ice cream. We're all ice cream, but we have different flavors and preferences. Dr. Reid, how would you break into or instruct one of your students how to break into the field of ID if you don't have a background in ID? And what background do you think supports an entrance into the field?
I think most of us don't have a true ID background. I mean, so many of us come from so many different areas to begin with. I mean, I'm an English person. You know, I'm an English degree. I have colleagues, designers who are scientists, linguistics degrees, communications degrees. I think when it comes down to it, really, we're all sort of content experts in something other than ID, and then ID is this sort of lens that we tend to look through in terms of everything else that we're doing. And so I think having a strong background in communication and English and writing and being able to convey your ideas to other people is really helpful. Once you have a degree in instructional design and you're looking to break through and you want to do something, whether it's in academia or corporate or military, I think one of the biggest advantages is to have a portfolio of work, which of course we do here at NCU with you, and you sort of curate that along the way and throughout the program. But I think that's an essential part of, in a way, marketing yourself in the things that you can do to others to show them these different artifacts that you've developed over time and what you could potentially do for them. And then I think also importantly, it's really key that you come to potential employers with ideas, right? If you think of it from the employer perspective, they want someone who's going to bring new, fresh ideas and outlooks to their business or to their school district or their school. So having these specific ideas and oftentimes knowing out there what's free and what's not free can also be extremely beneficial. Dr. Summerville talked about Screencast-O-Matic, a free screen recording tool. So many times I get questions from people like, we need a free program for this, or something. And what kind of ideas do you have? And I know that in a lot of our courses, we ask you to do a lot of that research and look online, see what tools are available, what are the upsides and downsides to those tools, what types of maybe ethical or legal or even political considerations are there when we're thinking about adopting or recommending these tools to other people. So I think bringing ideas to the table can also really help you sell yourself into an ID position.
Great points. It actually made me think of the idea that I always thought, and I think, Dr. Porter, you got to this point too, where I didn't know I was doing instructional design before I knew that was a thing, before I knew there was a field called instructional design. And that reminds me of a book I'm putting in the chat called The Accidental Instructional Designer. And that's a bit of a fun read as well, to be like, oh, wait, I'm doing ID. I'm not prepared to do ID. How do I do it? So great answer. Did any, Dr. Armstrong or Dr. Porter, did either of you want to jump in? Not required, just want to give you the option.
Yeah, yes, the one thing that I would say, especially when I look at a lot of our courses, you're actually designing work products that if you spend a lot of time and effort on them and you get an A, are very valuable, and you can use them to put together a portfolio. So in a lot of the courses as well, you are able to pick a topic that's a topic that you know a lot about, that you're using now. So if you combine that topic with what we're asking you to do and create a really powerful work product and then go in for a job interview and you can show them, that speaks volumes.
That really gets us to a question that someone else asked. I think you've really sort of answered it, and that was, how important is it to have a digital portfolio as an ID? And I think from what Dr. Reid and Dr. Armstrong said, they've really reinforced that. And they've alluded to, for those of you who are already in the Master of Science in Instructional Design or MSID program, you've probably already discovered that a digital portfolio or e-portfolio is part of the requirements of that program. But if you are an ID or you're in one of the doctoral programs in IDs, a portfolio could be valuable for you too. And I encourage you, go into the IDCOP and post a link to your portfolio if you're willing to share it, and others can offer feedback and learn from your experiences as well. I see Chloe asked a question, what items should be in your portfolio? I think Dr. Armstrong, you mentioned work samples. Dr. Summerville, you were going to respond? Go ahead.
I was. I'm actually writing an article on this very thing and how to curate portfolios, but it's for the greater educational field. But I have to say that put anything in your portfolio that you're proud of, anything that you can, speak to, because you never know what is going to hit somebody like right in the face that may not even have anything to do with the job for which you've applied, but it is something that an employer can relate to. And I think that this is really important, and you have to curate. It can't be just everything that you've done in class, because there are some things that you will say to yourself, I'm not proud of this. I wish I had a do-over. One of the classes I designed, there is like an option for a do-over. But I think that that's how you decide what goes in there. What are you proud of? What do you think is most important that you showcase? And then you can better, curate what you have. But definitely do not put everything in your portfolio, and have multiple portfolios for multiple situations if you're applying in different fields.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. I like what you said about sometimes we had a do-over, because I think, one kind of portfolio, or at least one thing in your portfolio you might consider, is something you did early in the program or early in your career, something that, and then how you improved upon it, because that demonstrates your growth. And
your growth, yep, absolutely.
I could write an article about all the things I learned about ID once I was in an ID program that I totally did the opposite of when I was actually doing ID before I was more trained in it. So that's a great point. All right, then. We also mentioned feedback. So that brings me back, I have my list, to the question about, well, first we'll talk soft skills. I think providing effective feedback is one of those soft skills. So the question is, what kinds of soft skills are important for an instructional designer? And then I'll get to the question about feedback. So soft skills, who wants to define soft skills and speak to some of those soft skills?
It's Ann. I'd be happy to, but you could do it.
No, I saw Dr. Summerville pointing to you, in fact. So please, go ahead.
I think soft skills are kind of the key overall to success. And one of the big ones would be to be able to build rapport and relationships, and to understand how important that is. As an IDer, you will either be part of a team or leading a team, and there are going to be sponsors, an executive sponsor. And oftentimes, when we did big installations at Ernst & Young, there would be the president of Bank of America, along with the CLO, and then all of the CLO's direct reports. So you had a lot of people that you had to work with, you had to build relationships with, and you actually had to know who supported your ideas, who didn't, and how to overcome objections with the ones that didn't, because you could be losing millions of dollars worth of business by not knowing that. So building relationships, building rapport, as Dr. Summerville said, and Dr. Reid said, communications, verbally, as well as with the written word. But when you're live with people, also your body language and your vocals, because the research shows us that if your vocals and your body language don't match your words, it's the vocals first and then the body language that people are going to take, and your words are last. So that's key to being really successful. In addition to that, being self-regulated, knowing that if you get into how to handle yourself in a tense situation, and how to keep yourself calm, because you'll find those in your journeys, and the higher up you go in ID, the more that you will that you'll find that. And then to be able to assess your own skills, What do you know? Like, I know I work constantly is what am I really good at? Not only in ID, but I do a lot of mentoring of doctoral students. So what are my strong suits in qualitative and quantitative research? What do I need to work more on? What do I need to learn about? And how do I get that? And who can I reach out to in my organization? Like, I'm working on a course right now, and Dr. Hall said to me, reach out to Dr. Reid. And I did. I haven't heard back from him yet. I'm still waiting. But that's what we do. We reach out to each other, and that's what you need to learn to do in terms of soft skills.
Awesome. Great response. Anyone want to add to?
Tiny, this big. When you get your doctorate, you're going to intimidate the mess out of some people. So that's when it becomes really critical that you rely on your soft skills, that instructional designers are kind of inherently helpers. And if that's not you, then maybe that's not the field for you. But I will tell you that for me, walking into a corporate position with a PhD, my boss said she was afraid I was red penciling her all the time. And I just had to build that rapport with different people. You know, I'm a person who happens to have a degree and I'm here to help. So that's the flip side of what Anne was talking about with having a lot of higher up people. You'll also have people who won't have your degree. They may not even have a college degree. So it's just really important that you showcase, hey, I'm real and I'm here to help.
Great points. I know I once worked with a community college on an HVAC course. I learned a lot about how my system worked. You know, I just changed the thermostat and it works. I learned a lot about that. But, you know, the instructors weren't degreed. They didn't need to be degreed in their field. They had associate's degrees. So, yeah, our content experts are experts in their field, whatever those degrees are. And I want to put it on record that Dr. Reid did respond in the chat that he's going to respond to Dr. Armstrong. So, see, we have a good time here. Totally call each other out. It's call out culture in the instructional design field. So I want to talk a little bit about effective feedback. The question was, what does effective feedback look like from an instructional designer to the expert that the ID is working with? And Anne, you mentioned vocals and words. So I think we can answer that two ways. One way is, how do you provide effective feedback in terms of content? But maybe in the other words, it's the other way. It's sort of tone and things like that. So maybe I'll toss it to Dr. Porter first. Dr. Porter, what does effective feedback look like?
To me, one that goes back to being an English teacher, a lot of effective feedback is following the feedback, feed up, feed forward process that we kind of have here at NCU, and I've become a firm believer of that. I try to tell my students when I try to have a conversation with them before the class starts, and I always say, you know, you're going to get a lot of feedback from me. You can't take it personally, and it's meant to make you a better writer, a better scholar, and a better ID. So, you know, it's consciously thinking about the materials that we're telling them what to do. I don't just tell them they did something wrong. I try to tell them what to do, how they can find it right, or where they can find the information to make it right, or to collect different information if they kind of don't get some concepts that are being presented. So it's kind of using, I mean, feedback is nothing but a teachable moment. And as long as we put it down to that level and think about, okay, I'm teaching with the feedback, that's the most important thing to think about with feedback.
Okay, so when you're thinking sort of you're teaching the content expert or the subject matter expert sort of how to do it better the next time, or how to learn from that too. I see. Dr. Summerville.
Barb, you know, one thing just for all of us, since everybody here is part of the ID community that we're building here, and what we really want to have is a growth mindset community, and follow Carol Dweck's work where she says that those who are really successful are not necessarily the people with the strongest aptitude at something, but the people who embrace failure, search out criticism, constructive criticism, search it out and try to make themselves better. And one of the examples she gives, which I just love, is that Michael Jordan was not even on his varsity team in basketball in high school. He couldn't make it. And it just made him more determined to learn all of the skills he needed to do to be a great basketball star. And although I'm not a basketball fan, I understand he's one of the best that's ever been down the pike. So he took that criticism and he looked for it and he built himself. And that's what we all need to do together. We need to say, what can we do better and how can we do it, and get ideas from each other.
In some ways, that's what the whole field is about, doing things better, right? And designing it for improved knowledge, skills, attitudes, and dispositions. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. You know, like I said, I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So I live right between the University of North Carolina and Duke. And so basketball is a huge thing around here. Michael Jordan went to UNC. And I think it was him. So pardon me if I'm attributing it to the wrong sports star, but you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So get out there and take those shots. Anyone else want to offer anything about effective feedback? Okay, then I'm going to go around the horn and ask each of you what the most important skill is as an instructional designer, and then I'm going to take a question that's come up in the Q&A. So what's the one most important skill as an ID? And we'll do Dr. Reid first.
Well, as much as this sounds like a cop-out answer, I think that communication is paramount. Because whether it's talking to the SME, content expert, or other audiences, or in the designing of your instruction, you need to be articulate and explicit and have a very clear understanding with whomever you're working with what your intentions are and what you're trying to achieve. And that's why we stress so heavily, at least in the program, the importance of goals and objectives and things, that we want to get those just right, because that's a great starting place for us, but it's also the way that we can evaluate how things turned out as well. So I think just being able to clearly communicate ideas and what you're thinking to other people is really important. And I think that's also almost a new digital literacy yeah, Susan just mentioned it in the chat box. Absolutely, that's where I was headed with this, and you beat me to it, which was we're in this new era of it's almost a new literacy that we have to possess of. I'm a bad example because I've not yet responded to Anne's email, but response times to emails and how we're conveying messaging and responses through email or through virtual environments or things has made it somewhat more difficult. So I think being able to communicate very clearly and connect with other people is absolutely essential in our positions.
Communication is a great one. Thank you. Dr. Porter, one most important skill as an ID.
Open mind. You got to be able to have an open mind because we're going to get criticism too in ID, no matter what we're doing in the field. And I think we can see better solutions when we do have an open mind and we're not just seeing a problem or a person, we're seeing the overall big picture.
I think sometimes I want to tell our content experts to have an open mind too. Shh, don't tell them I said that. Dr. Armstrong.
I would say being a problem solver, and to that point, to really understand that you have to get to the root cause of the problem, because otherwise you might be solving something that doesn't need solving. So got to dig deep.
Thank you, Dr. Summerville.
So I'm going to go back to technology because that's how I roll. But you have to be able to communicate virtually. There are a lot of people who are not cool with that, and I'm like, then you're really going to struggle, because whether it's a webinar, whether it's an audio conference, phone conference, I mean, it is a skill set, and you need to learn how to do it. So, for example, I gesture all the time. Notice my hands are out of the way so I don't make people sick. I also am a very, very active listener, and this is the way that I am. You'll notice if I'm listening to somebody else, I'm paying attention, and that I'm not a talking head. And this is a skill set that I have learned over the years that has made me a pretty good webinar facilitator. And I've done that for I had 800 people at a webinar one time for project managers. And that's because I'm a very passionate person, and I let that come through. So you have to learn how to create an online presence, and you have to be able to communicate in some type of virtual way, so that, I mean, it's just critical, and it is a skill set. You can't just hop on the phone one day and, oh, I'm just going to do it, because you gotta have some practice and learn how to do it well.
Can I just say something, Jennifer, getting back to the whole, and my degree is in instructional technology and media. So I consider it as an idea in this day and age that you have to be really comfortable with all the different technologies. And I don't mean that you have to be able to install something. That's not what I'm talking about, but you have to be comfortable with how to use them and how they would be used in ID. And I was actually struggling with Snapchat, which I have a lot of my actual grandchildren who, it's the big thing. And I was Snapchatting with them, but I couldn't really figure out with them why it was the big thing that it was. And then one of my students, who's a superintendent at a charter school system, she wanted to do a study, which she's actually in the process of doing right now, in embedding Snapchat into a high school class to see whether we could ignite intrinsic motivation in the learners by doing that. And so she and I decided that while we were going through this process, that we would communicate with each other via Snapchat. And I do have to say that, short of talking, because I still think talking directly to my students, I get to know them the best, but I have gotten to know her so well because of Snapchat, because it allows us easily to build humor into each other, even into difficult situations, like IRB, saying, no way you're going to do this. So I would say that we need to really be open to these technologies and open to how they can be used in different environments, like K through 12 or higher ed or even business from that standpoint of view. When 77%, I think it is, of people 15 to 22 are using this tool, there's something there.
Thank you. I do see we have some other questions coming in the chat. I do want to turn to one in the Q&A, and in typical ID fashion, Amber, Dr. Armstrong responded in the chat with a question. So that's what we IDs do. We just ask you more questions. But Amber's question is, what if you come from a graphic designer, fashion designer background, and you know some of the tech behind ID, but are just missing some pieces? Dr. Armstrong, do you want to follow up on your question to Amber?
Yeah, sure, I would. So my experience in hiring ID design teams is that the graphic artist people are the hardest ones to find. And so that it would be relatively easy to get a job in an ID, on an ID team, if you had good graphic artist skills, and then you could work with the other people on the team to learn the different processes and procedures and instructional strategies and learning theory and all that kind of stuff that we do. Having hired a number of graphic artists, usually what I would do is I'd either create training within my organizations to train them on the other basics, or I would encourage them to go out and get a degree, which many of them do. So if you've got that strong a background, I would get a master's in ID, and I think that combined with your graphics, you'll have no trouble finding a job.
I see everybody nodding their head, so I think there's some good consensus there, and I hope that was helpful, Amber. If not, please keep the conversation going until we get your question answered. Dr. Summerville, the next question I'm going to go to you first on. All right, so you want to use those active listening skills you talked about? So leadership training initiatives, which often include managerial tasks and leadership soft skills, tend to fail across organizations. Why do you think these training initiatives often fail? And how would you tackle the ID process to ensure a successful leadership training initiative? So, just an easy one.
It's very easy. Actually, it's great because I got a student who's doing this exact thing for her dissertation. And she has just finished chapter 1, woohoo, as of today. But I think it doesn't really matter the level, because training fails at many levels. And I think part of that is that we make assumptions on what it is that people need and want to learn. And so it's really important that that needs assessment, that we understand what the needs are, who our learners are, what the task would look like that they would be doing after this training. And it has to come from the people who are going to be learning. It can't just come from, top down, or even I think sometimes it's just, what do the trainers think? And sometimes that's out of necessity. I get that you're just asked to put training together in 2 seconds. But if you have time, you have to find out what it is that people are needing from the training, regardless, or it will fail every time. So that's something I think that, like, if I just have one thing, it is do your front-end analysis, do your needs assessment, learner, and task analysis without fail, and don't make assumptions based on your own experience.
I see some head nodding, including my own. I would certainly agree. I think often we start with content, what we want to talk about, whether or not folks need to know that. So very good. I'm going to take a question that came up in the chat then, before we move on to some of the others that have come in, and that is, what similarities do you see between ID and visual design and graphic design? Dr. Armstrong, I'm going to pitch that one back to you, because you were talking about the value of those two.
Well, yeah, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. So when you've got somebody who can take something and make the concept visual and then back it up, I mean, we can back it up with text, but it's even better if we can back it up with some kind of voiceover. You can send a message much better than you can send it any other way. So to me, a lot of ideas, me included, I'm not what you would call a graphic. I'm not going to draw. You're not going to, anything I draw, you're not going to use. So I've got to be able to find somebody, and like in being a subject matter expert for Barb, sometimes she has people on her team who can take the ideas that I come up with and make them into these wonderful things. So if you have both of those skills, you've got a home run.
Thank you. And I have to give a shout out. They're not really on my team. They're on the ID team, but we do have creative services who can do some terrific things. I think that was a great comparison. One of the questions in the Q&A is about content experts or subject matter experts. In case of having non-responsive SMEs during course design, what are your recommendations from the school side to coach them to follow the standards that are instituted by the school, or even at an organizational perspective, so even not specific to a school? How do you get non-responsive SMEs to come around to the institutional expectations? Let's see, Dr. Reid is not making eye contact, so I'm going to call on him. What do you think, Dr. Reid?
Yeah, you caught me, but this is pretty common, right? So you'll probably run into this problem where you have maybe a minor conflict with SMEs in terms of getting them to do what you need them to do, and their resistance. I think one of the easiest things that you can do is maybe parse out some of the smaller tasks instead of overwhelming them with a bunch of things that you need from them right then and there. That might create a little bit of pushback or resistance on their end, and maybe they might not buy into what you're trying to do. But if you parse those things out little by little and ask probing questions maybe to start with, as if you yourself as the instructional designer was the learner, that you're sort of working with this subject matter expert. You want them to teach you, and you want to ask probing questions of what they would do here, or how would they handle this, or what would they talk about here, in maybe more of a conversational way, rather than just a sort of workload kind of way. I need this from you. You need to do this for me, in that sort of managerial sense. I think really just kind of having a conversation with them and opening it up to human conversation, I think can really help the process there and smooth things out.
So particularly in our online environment, maybe just calling them up instead of doing it just in text. Dr. Porter, I wanted to ask you to weigh in on this question because you previously mentioned the feedback, feed up, feed forward as a way of offering feedback. How do you see that particular approach maybe helping to nudge non-responsive or even resistant SMEs?
I've had this experience many times, as Dr. Reid mentioned too. I don't know that feedback, feed up, feed forward works all the time. Sometimes we just have to sit down face to face if we can, or with a webinar like this, so that they can see us and that it's important. Sometimes they don't have the idea that, they have all this other work to do, and we've got to have to kind of, talk to them about how we can schedule this to fit their time period as well. Yeah, we've had to do some things. I've had to do some things like editing. Once again, we get into that editing aspect. And then it's kind of, especially if your SME is, has a terminal degree, you have to really do a lot of hand holding and try to work with them so that they're comfortable. Really, to be honest, the major problem I've had with a SME, and again, she was a professor at Harvard, so that was a little difficult in dealing with, and she didn't want to follow our deadline, and this was a contract with the EPA, and it was non-negotiable. And sometimes you just got to say, you got to have a plan B. If you can't do this, I have another SME that I have to go to. And, usually if you tell them you have a plan B in process, for some reason that tends to help a lot. And that worked with that particular person as well. I can only give you from my experience with that.
Oh, that's great. That's why we have you on. Anyone else want to chime in to this very common occurrence?
It's Anne. I had one once. I was really about tearing my hair out. This person, and I'm one of these people that gets sign off on everything, and I keep every copy that I've ever had in a project until the project is signed off and paid for. I mean, stacks of paper. So this woman, went through and she did a version, and this one chapter, it was all, this is fabulous, on and on and on. And then we did our next set of revisions, and it comes back, and chapter 1's totally marked up with all these horrible comments all over it. And it's identical. I mean, identical. So I actually went to her boss, and I brought the stuff with me and sat down and said, I don't know what to do about this. I really don't. I know we've got a deadline, but, and so the boss talked to her, and it changed. And after that, it was smooth sailing. So sometimes you have to escalate.
So can I out myself? Because I was that SME, and I probably still continue to be that SME. I think that from a SME perspective, or from a content expert perspective, it becomes really important for somebody to let that person know that, if they can improve the process, to not just complain about it, but to help improve the process. And because that is buy-in. And so one of the things that I have personally done as a SME, because it works for me, it may not work for everybody, but I come to the kickoff meeting really prepared. I have like a very fleshed out outline so that I know that at least my direction is correct. And that is from years and years of being a dean. And that's part of the whole project management thing. So that, Barb always is at the kickoff meetings, and if she can say, yeah, I do not like week 5, I can say, no problem. I don't really like week 5 either. So let me think of something else. But I think that that's really important, is for instructional designers to let the subject matter experts or the content experts know that they have a say. And I think that becomes just a better mode of communication. And for me, when I got in the weeds a couple of times, I was like, I'm really sorry. I am not going to be able to turn it in on time because I am in the weeds because I just got back from a conference or whatever. And that opens that door, that communication door, because we're human beings. And I think those things are really critical.
And ID is a craft, I like to call it. So part science, part art. And sometimes our creative muses are on vacation and we just need a little more time or to step away for that inspiration to come back. All right, so switching gears just a little bit, here's a broader question. It was originally asked in the context of forensic psychology, but broadly, how can instructional design be used in private practice? So who here has been an independent consultant?
Me.
All right, we'll go Dr. Armstrong and then back to Dr. Summerville.
Well, I would get back to what Dr. Summerville said earlier. The first thing we have to do is a really detailed front-end needs analysis. And when, like I was thinking about, I have this psychologist that I go to that I started with, I think 4 years ago when I decided that I needed to really learn how to meditate for a whole bunch of reasons. And this woman's very interesting. She's got her PhD in psychology and she's a prima ballerina and danced with the New York Ballet and is in Psychology Today on how to meditate all of the time. So I could see, and she knew starting out with me that she would have to give me the science behind it. So she had me read a book by a gentleman out of Harvard on the relaxation revolution. And their science of why meditation is so important is all in there. So I was buying in. So she walked me through the steps and she actually audio taped, which was great, a meditation for me. But had she had like a little quick sheet on the steps I had to take, which an instructional designer could help her design, it would be fabulous. So that there would be different things like that. And I don't know what else other people go to talk to people like this for, but whatever somebody could do like that would be very beneficial to be able to go home with.
Thank you. Dr. Summerville, what did you want to add?
Well, so I have taught online for 21 years. So that's what I've done. I know, 2 tin cans and a string in between, right? So that's one of the things that I've done as an independent consultant is to help people, help institutions that don't have online anything, help corporations that don't have online anything. And what becomes critical is exactly what Dr. Armstrong said. It is to find out what it is that they are going to want and need from some type of instruction. And then also, what are the barriers? What are your pain points? Because I have found that that is the biggest part when I'm doing consulting work is to be able to address those. I think I could just come in and address pain points, not do anything instructionally, but just talk about how an organization can address the pain points, whatever those are, and I find those out ahead of time, and that's about half of what I have planned to discuss with the organization. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Let's see. This next question talks a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It can be a challenge to create a neutral design with awareness of bias and cultural sensitivity, while also creating compelling classroom and lab activities. How do we bend instructional designs towards diversity, equity, and inclusion? I know that the idea of critical pedagogy is something that I'm really becoming more and more interested in, and that wasn't really much of a part of the program that I was in. And so I know I'm learning along with this question. Who might want to take it first? Don't everyone jump at once.
Well, because of because of what I'm doing with culture, have done and am doing with culture, there's two very different sides of this coin. There is a way of thinking that we should, to internationalize or globalize something, completely strip out anything that is culturally specific or culturally charged in any way, shape, or form. And another group of thinkers would say that if you did that, that you could then take that and customize it for a specific group, bringing into that group the cultural, whether it's the terminology or the acronyms or the any of the features of the environment for them themselves. And then you're going to another way of thinking that is basically saying what we really need to do is make the content, the course, the instruction, the tool, whatever it might be, so learner-centric that the learner will be creating their own culture by having the design so centered a bit around them and what they're doing. And in actually my dissertation, which was in 2007, culture was one of the pieces that we were looking at, because there was a whole huge rollout of companies that sold packaged courses, a lot of packaged courses in soft skills, for example. And like when I talked to Johnson & Johnson, I went down and talked to them, they had spent like $2 million. I can't remember who the company at the time was, Smart Force, they changed name. And they had, the only people that ever used it were the people who had been terminated and were doing things to get jobs. And yet when they built courses that were customized for J&J, where the building looked like J&J and the people looked like J&J and the values and mission were like, people then would go and take those courses more readily. So that boded to how important it was for the culture to be represented, for people to use it. So it's just an interesting, and I don't at this point, I believe in most cases, you either have to let the learner customize it with learner-centric. And I try with all my courses to let the student decide what the scenario is going to be. And hopefully they have a scenario from their own experience that they can use. Yes, you can go, to case studies, but they're never as good. I remember getting my MBA. They made me do a case study of Barnes & Noble. I was bored to death. I don't think I learned anything. When I could build my own case, I learned a ton. So I think you have to customize it to some degree, and if you can do it learner-centered, I'm betting that that's the best part of the solution.
Please, Dr. Reid, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on what Anne was talking about. I have a real-world example that I'm just now wrapping up. So in one of my other roles for another institution, I'm an evaluation analyst, which means what I mostly do is I receive instructional materials and programs from third parties who are hoping to get this thing adopted by school districts, usually K-12. And the most recent one that we looked at was a program for socio-emotional learning, and it was geared towards K through third graders. And it was really trying to teach them socio-emotional skills and empathy and things like that. And they chose for their mascot to sort of lead all of these lessons and stories and things for their learners. They chose this green Martian alien figure called Z was its name. And part of our feedback to them was, you really should make this more authentic. Kids aren't necessarily going to relate to this alien coming in and telling these stories. And they really pushed back against us not wanting to make the changes because they had already invested so much money into the graphic design and the technology. And they literally had plush toys of this Z Martian character that they were using in the classrooms. And then, of course, the feedback came back from the students and from the teachers that they really couldn't understand why this was a Martian alien teaching them these human skills, and they wanted to know why it wasn't just like one of them. And the reason that the developers gave was that they were trying to be sort of culturally neutral, and they didn't want to, suggest that, any cultures were really different than others. And what they ended up doing was sort of shooting themselves in the foot in a way that, in doing so and making it so neutral, they actually couldn't then connect with their learners. And I think that's also a danger. So really the moral of the story was just to be as authentic as possible. And Martians just really aren't that authentic.
True words haven't been spoken this entire webinar, Dr. Reid. I think for me, I think you just have to make sure that you have sufficient diversity in the voices at the table, or to send that out and ask other people to read it, because we're not going to see things. I have a white, female, cisgendered, heterosexual perspective, right? I have to ask people other than that to take a look at things. People who have had experiences that aren't pretty much middle class, things like that, to take a look at that. So I think that's definitely one way to get it. And we hear in the news often, don't we, where people haven't had sufficient voices at the table, and then they make a commercial or something with some awful guffaw that comes off as really offensive.
Barb, to your point, that's why the whole concept of something like rapid prototyping is so good, because you start testing it at a very small piece of the puzzle, and then keep retesting it to be sure that it's not going to fail. But the key, and I've made this mistake, so is to test with the audience that's going to take it. You can't test with anybody else.
Yes, I think definitely test before you order the plushies. That's the second lesson from our ID webinar. And I know someone else earlier was talking about user experience testing. So great points. This question comes in the context of career and technical education, or CTE courses. But again, the question has broader relevance. How do you work with non-educators to build an instructional design model? Maybe not, we're thinking model as PhDers and EDDers. I'm sure we're thinking models with a very specific definition, but I don't know that the person who asked the question necessarily thought model in terms of a true ID model. So
can you read that one more time, Barb?
Yes. How do you work with non-educators to build an instructional design model? I'm going to give you guys a moment to ponder that question while I remind everyone. This was scheduled for 90 minutes, so as we are coming to some of our last questions, if you have any additional questions, please be sure to put them in the Q&A, or if you put them in the chat, we'll try to catch them as well. So this is the time to start putting those final questions in there. Now, who wants to tackle the question about non-educators and building ID models?
It's Ann again. I would say that you would have to hold a brainstorming questioning session, and there's a whole process out there called Q-storming by Mary Lee, and her last name escapes me. But you really have to find out as much as you can about who they are, what they need, what they want, and what their vision is for the end goal of all of this, and the timeline that they need to get there. And from that, you would start to build it with their input, and then your goal would be clearly to get their buy-in. So I would do it iteratively with, version after version of them giving me feedback. Is this what you're thinking? That kind of, yeah. Thank you, Barb.
Yes, I put the link in the chat. Thank you.
So one thing that I think is important is that, like, my background, and I can't say it's not in education because I've been in education for long enough, but my undergraduate degree is in marketing. And I think that this is something that's really important, is when you have those voices at the table, whether it's a physical table or a virtual table, that there is an understanding that those voices need to be heard, regardless of if they're educators or if they're marketers or if they're in HR or whatever they are. Everybody has a little bit of educator in them, I think. And that's a skill set that can be brought out in just about anybody, because we have thoughts and opinions, and most people, not all, but most people can explain some of those things. That is teaching. So if we can explain that to people, then they feel a lot more comfortable than just coming in and saying, well, you're a marketer, you're not an educator, therefore you don't really know how to teach, so, here's some things. So again, we go back to the soft skill set. We go back to the, being inclusive of everybody who could have a say. And, these are things that are really important in our field, is really being able to discuss a lot of this and have buy-in from people.
Thank you. So I'm going to combine two questions that came in. One is, how is the field of instructional design changing? And a related question, I think, is, what are some important questions of practice and of research that doctoral students could be investigating? It sounds like maybe a student's trying to find their doctoral topic. So how is the field of ID changing, and what are some important questions of practice and research? I'm going to go with Dr. Porter first on this one.
Well, I'm going to go back to Dr. Summerville, and it's a lot has to do with technology. The technology is changing tremendously, almost daily, and so we got to have to. That's one of the keys we have to kind of keep our fingers on the pulse of, is what is the new technology, what is coming out. And I always tell my students, sign up for these newsletters to find this information and follow it. As far as doctoral type degree, focusing on research type of things, I bounce a lot of ideas off of students with this as well. And I try to get them to focus on something that they are familiar with. And, in a field they're familiar with, if they're in a field like, K through 12 or higher ed, what type of things can we look at with that and collect data on and start to focus in on those type of things. The topics, I think we get, and I know when my own going through this process, I thought, there's nothing new under the sun we can write about. And when you start to think about what is a unique focus in your own area, then it's time to kind of look at. I also tell my students to bounce ideas off your employer, off your friends, off your family, and see what's out there. Kind of jot down some ideas that you've noticed are problems that exist, and see where you can go. It's I think probably the best thing you can do is look at your own experience and what type of a problem you can look at and solve and maybe analyze a little bit.
Thank you. Other ideas? Where's the field going to? What are some good questions to be asking?
So a couple of years ago, I think it's really important, if you've got a local arm of a big organization. So like, I'm part of Texas DLA, which is the Texas Distance Learning Association. And I mean, it may seem like a small arm, but just remember, Texas is not a small state. So our conferences are huge. But a few years ago, we were talking about the importance of AR and VR. So, but the interesting thing is that is kind of backed off a little, because those are expensive technologies to produce. So you have to, like, okay, this year it's AR, VR, next year it might be something else, but pay attention to what you see in the media, because that, I think, gives you a pretty good idea of what your employers are going to be eyeballing. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a thing, but watch those indicators as they come out. As far as topics are concerned, I can't agree enough with Dr. Porter, is that it's got to come from you. It can't come from somebody else. And you have to have a passion for it. And remember, it's got to be done in 36 weeks. So it's not something that you can research over like 2 to 3 years currently. But you also don't want to do that, because dissertation is finite. You have your whole life to research and study and do whatever you want. Like, I'm not doing a thing that I had to study, that I studied on because it's too old now. But I think it's really important that you have something that will keep you through the whole of the dissertation, but it's gotta be yours. That's critical.
Yes, because a dissertation is a complex process. Anyone else want to add anything about research questions or how the field is changing? All right, so I think it was Dr. Armstrong, yes, has answered a question about certification to conduct ID, and no, there's no license or certification required. That does lead very nicely, Bridget, into a question about what professional organization related to ID do you think is the most important one for students to join? Well, I'm not going to say anything. I'll wait till y'all respond first, and then I'll put some ideas out there. Let's toss it back to Dr. Reid first.
I think the most obvious one is AECT. And I'm thinking back to my days as a grad student. That's the organization that I got the most out of in my graduate studies. I would highly encourage you also, thank you, Barb. I would highly encourage you to become active in these organizations, whether it's AECT or something else, but commit yourself to these conferences, attend them, actually attend the sessions, actually engage with other people, try to present, if it's a poster session or something like that. I would also encourage you to try and collaborate with peers, colleagues, or even professors on projects together. Professors are always happy, most of the time, to want to work with you on these sorts of things, because the conferences in that venue is just so important, not for just networking purposes, but also for the common knowledge base as well.
Thank you. Yes, AECT was certainly one. I saw others giving a thumbs up to, and one I would add. And I know many of these I know AECT has a really discounted student membership. And I know as a graduate student, I attended the conference for free for several years because I volunteered a certain number of hours, and I was able to attend for free and really meet some people, get to be starstruck when you're like, oh, that's the author of my textbook. And so that's really, really cool as well. So we also have ATD in the chat, and their ISTE, of course, is for one for technology and education. Dr. Summerville also added CITE. I think we'd be remiss without mentioning the International Board of Standards for Training in Performance and Instruction, or IBSTIPI, which our ID programs here at NCU are aligned to the competencies and standards of IBSTIPI, AECT, and ATD. And there are some assignments which ask you to look at these others. USDLA is the U.S. Distance Learning Association. I've certainly presented with them as well. I think those are often very business focused more than academic focused as well. So,
Barb, also, because I just submitted a proposal to AACE, and I thought I was going to have to pay for a membership, but because of North Central, it was free.
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
So that was really good to know.
I will find the link real quick, but if you could remind everyone what that particular one was while I find the link to put in the chat.
It's the Association, I hope I get this right, Association for Advancements of Computers in Education.
All right, and I am trying to find out if this is the right one. Surprisingly, there are a lot of them that are.
Here, let me look at that. Hold on, because I do have.
You might put that in the chat for me.
Second.
While she's doing that, and I encourage our panelists or others who want to share, as Nicole did, some of the other organizations that you've joined or that you've presented at. And I love the fact that you brought up presentations and working with your professors, Dr. Reid. That's something that NCU is really starting to support as well, and it's great experience. So please reach out. Oh, Dr. Summerville clarified. I got AACE is the organization, site is the conference. So that's something I didn't know. So thank you. What if I am in another program at NCU and want to transfer into the instructional design program? Please contact your advisor. Then the last question that I have that has come in, and again, we'll go around the horn and give everyone a chance to respond to, is what is your favorite thing about being an instructional designer? Or what is your favorite thing about instructional design?
I'll go because I'm easy. So I get bored really easily, really easily, really. This field has never bored me, ever. It is constantly changing. So if you don't like change, this is not for you. I mean, the basic tenets of instructional design go way back like 100 years. So, you know, you have your nice foundation, but everything else changes. And it's a very exciting, dynamic field with a place for so many people to have a say and for them to participate. And like, you know, when I was a dean and we'd have a graphic designer apply for something, I'm like, grab that person. So it just, you know, it can be so exciting because, I mean, I have known people who their background is music. So it's a bunch of different people that come together with this common focus on designing instruction, but it can be from all over. It's always changing and it's always exciting. So that's what I love most about it.
Thank you. I want to be mindful that we only have about 3 minutes left, but with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Armstrong. What's your favorite thing?
Well, I like solving ill-structured problems and making people really happy about it. I remember a time when I did a big program for Smith Barney, and we had rolled it out, and of the 9,000 people who could come, only 900 came. I mean, only 500 came, and they were very upset. And so what we did was this was such a simple solution. We gave them badges that were colorful, that they went to all the annual meetings, that showed that they were a specialist. And within 1 year, we went from 500 of the 9,000 to 5,000. And within 3 years, we went to 8,500 because of a badge, a little badge free.
Wow. Fascinating.
Amazing.
Dr. Porter.
I have two things. One, variety, like Dr. Summerville said, there's a variety of things you can do. I can bring in my past experience. I can learn new things. The other thing is I like to tear things apart and figure out what makes them work. It's kind of that reverse engineering type of stuff. I should have been an engineer, but that's kind of my whole thing too, is breaking something apart, seeing what makes it work and putting it together again in a better process.
So really ideas like learning engineering. So
yes, perfectly.
Dr. Reid.
Yeah, I'll second that as well. One of my favorite authors, Don Norman, who, if you haven't read his stuff, he writes a lot about design, but he actually refers to it as cognitive engineering. So that's one wonderful aspect of this field, is that you get to tear things down and then build and create something and then evaluate its effectiveness. Is it working? What do we need to do to fix it? But I also think the major feature for me is getting to be a chameleon of sorts and talk to all sorts of people and work with people from all different backgrounds and sort of translate their expertise into something for a larger audience. So whether that's music or business or a foreign language or some type of training, you really do get to apply your skill set to a whole host of different areas.
Well, I put the link for Don Norman in the chat, but that brings me to what my favorite thing about instructional design is, that last piece that you mentioned, and that is that I get to learn a little bit about a lot of stuff. So that's what I love. And with Nicole coming back, that's our tip to kick it back over to her. But let me thank you one more time, panelists, for being here very much. Thank you. And thank you all for attending. Nicole.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Hall. And I appreciate everybody attending our webinar. As we go ahead and finish up, Dr. Hall, if there's any other questions, is there a specific email, or should ID students or prospective students reach out to you or specific person?
Thank you. You're absolutely welcome to reach out individually to any of us, but I really encourage you to use the Instructional Design Community of Practice. I put the link in the chat. Please post your questions there for the benefit of everyone and for more engagement. I'd love to see you there.
Perfect. And thank you so much. And for everybody attending, this webinar is recorded and will be uploaded within the next few days to the Commons as well as the SOE community. And thank you so much for attending. I wish you all a great day. And thank you again to Dr. Hall and our panelists.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, all.